You're running a tight ship over there.
I do, and good evening. It is now 6. So welcome to the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing virtually has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you will be called upon and unmuted. There is a chat function in Zoom. However, this is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. Our procedures for public hearings begins with a presentation from the planning team, then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who are in person, then who signed up on the sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you're attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. Finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Crystal. Good evening, everybody. We are citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by city council. We make final decisions on conditional use permits, variances and appeals, and recommendations to city council on subdivisions, rezones, annexations, and code or comprehensive plan amendments. Any decision made tonight may be appealed to city council, provided that the appeal is filed within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's meeting. That's why it's important to give your name and address when you testify tonight. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees with a staff report and if there is no public opposition, the item is placed on the consent agenda. All items that are placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order detailed a few minutes ago with staff, applicant, and neighborhood association presentations, and then followed by public testimony. Thank you all for attending tonight. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Schaefer.
Here.
Danley.
Here.
Gillespie.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
Mooney. Seha.
Here.
Torres.
Here.
Dong.
Here.
7 present, 1 absent.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, relatively short agenda this evening. We do have a couple of items eligible for the consent agenda, so we'll start there. First item for consent, or possible inclusion into consent, is item number 4, SUB 23-40 Beloba subdivision. This is at 4615 North Collister Drive, a preliminary plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 6 buildable and 3 common lots on 1.3 acres in an R1C zone. And is the applicant present this evening? Yes. Great. And are you in agreement with the terms and conditions of the staff report? Yes. Okay. Let the record show, thank you. Let the record show that the applicant is present and in agreement with the staff report. And is there anyone here tonight hoping to testify in opposition to this item? Okay, we'll go ahead and place item 4 on consent. And one more item, which is number 5. This is SUB 24-1. So Seville subdivision. Okay. 7610 North Gary Lane. Also a preliminary plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 15 buildable and 6 common lots on 2.18 acres in an R1C zone. The applicant is present, and are you gentlemen in agreement with the staff report? Yes. Very good. Let the record show that the applicant is present and in agreement with the staff report. Is there anyone hoping to testify in opposition to this item? Okay, very good. We'll go ahead and place item 5 on the consent agenda. And at this time, I will entertain a motion regarding consent.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Danley.
I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda consisting of the following items. Item number 4, SUB 23-40, located at 4615 North Collister Drive, a preliminary plat application. And item number 5, SUB 24-1, located at 7610 North Gary Lane, also a preliminary plat application, with each of their respective terms and conditions of their staff reports.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. I have a motion to approve consent by Commissioner Danley with a second by Commissioner Moore. Any further discussion? Very good. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Schaefer,
Yes.
Danley,
Yes.
Gillespie,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Seha,
Yes.
Torres,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Good luck with your projects. And let's see, back to our agenda this evening. Item number 3 wishes to defer. Excuse me. This is item number 3 is CFH 23-104. That's a Category 3 hillside development permit located at 5402 West Overland Road. The applicant is Centurion Engineers LLC. Along with that hillside application, we also have a PUD 23-32 at the same address, a conditional use permit for residential planned development comprised of 6 single-family units and 1 office lot on 1.12 acres in R2T, R2 and LOD zone. And then a preliminary and final plat, SUB 23-41, Braun Terrace subdivision at 5402 West Overland Road. And it looks like the applicant would wishes to defer this item to May 13th. Is the applicant present? Great. Is that correct? You want to defer till May 13th? Very good. And is there anyone present this evening hoping to testify in opposition to this item? These items? Okay, very good. At this time, I'll entertain a motion regarding item 3. And
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie.
move we defer item 3, all 3 parts of it, to our May 13th meeting.
Second.
Very good. I have a motion to defer by Commissioner Gillespie and a second by Commissioner Danley. Any further discussion?
You should have lots. Oh, like, no.
Very good. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Quit
Schaefer.
stalling, Danley.
Yes.
Danley,
Yes.
Gillespie,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Seha,
Yes.
Torres,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Back to the top of our agenda. That leaves us with 2 items to hear this evening. First up is item number 1, DRH 23-388 Jackson Food Stores at 6848 West State Street. This is an appeal of the DR Design Review Commission's denial to construct a new fuel canopy and renovate the existing building for use as a convenience store on 1.31 acre property in the C2D zone. We'll hear from staff first. Rachel Farrell.
Hey, good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Rachel Farrell. I'm a design review planner for the city of Boise, and before you is the appeal of Design Review Commission's denial for DRH 23-00388. Please note that this is a legacy code application. On November 22nd, 2023, Jackson's Food Stores submitted an application for the improvements to a site located at 6848 West State Street. The applicant proposes to construct a new fuel canopy, new drive aisles, new parking spaces, landscaping, right-of-way improvements on the vacant parcel fronting State Street, and proposes to use the existing commercial building towards the rear of the site to serve as a convenience store. The commercial building would be updated with new facade and roof materials, new door and window treatments, and construction of a new outdoor seating area. At the February 14th, 2024 hearing, the Design Review Commission denied the project based on not meeting the goals and policies of the Boise City Code. And on February 23rd, 2024, the applicant submitted an appeal of the decision. So staff would like to note that the action for the Planning and Zoning Commission on this item is to sustain, deny, or modify the decision and conditions. These are the findings in which the decision is to be made. So staff will now address the grounds for appeal. Staff reviewed the project and determined that the development of a new fuel canopy with additional site improvements for a new use on a vacant site would be subject to the design standards and the citywide design review guidelines. A fuel canopy structure located near the street does not meet the intent of the policies and the guidelines, specifically in Chapter 2, which includes design provisions that guide the look and feel of development when viewed from the street. The guidelines designate the project as being located in the commercial mixed-use block frontage. Additionally, the project did not meet the 20-foot maximum setback requirement as called out in the design review guidelines, which also state that parking and drive aisles shall be placed to the rear of the site, to the rear or side of the site. As shown here in the site plan, the project does not meet these standards. While the expansion and reuse of the commercial building for use as a convenience store meets the thresholds in figures 1-2 of the citywide design review guidelines for a remodel, the development of new fuel canopy with the additional improvements on the parcel fronting State Street does not. The proposed development and intensification of the site does not qualify as a level 1 improvement as stated by the appellant. The building additions and remodels standards stated in this section are not intended to apply to a project where the development footprint is expanding, expanding substantially and encompassing a new land area. In this specific case, the current vacant land area along State Street is subject to the evaluation as new development, and the level 1 thresholds referenced by the appellant are not applicable. In response to the second appeal issue, City Staff and Design Review Commission reviewed the project and could not make the appropriate findings in order to approve the project. In response to number 3, the project is located in an area on State Street designated by the city as having important visual character from the street. Blueprint Boise calls out State Street as a gateway street. The new fuel canopy structure developed on the vacant parcel would be subject to the standards in Chapter 4 of the guidelines, which helps guide new development. A new fuel canopy lacks activation, character, and facade details that would enhance the street frontage. The Design Review Commission could not find that the goals and policies have been met. In response to number 4, a convenience store with gasoline service is an allowed use per the C2D zone in the Legacy Code. The Design Review Commission could not make the findings that the project complies with the goals and policies of the citywide design review guidelines and therefore recommended denial. In conclusion, the planning team finds that the project is not in compliance with Boise City Code and recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission deny the appeal. This concludes staff presentation, and I will stand for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Next, we'll hear from the applicant slash appellant. Is 10 minutes going to do it for you guys? Is that enough time?
We would request.
You can tip that mic up. There you go.
Yes, Chair, we would politely request 15 minutes if possible.
Okay, I think that's fair.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Good evening, Chair, members of the commission. My name is Scott Stamm. Business address is 3450 East Commercial Court in Meridian. I'm the store development manager and architect working for Jackson's Food Stores. As the owner representative, I just wanted to provide you with some context for this appeal application, and then I'll turn it over to our entitlement specialist for more in-depth details. We currently operate a convenience store and fuel station at the corner. Let me advance the slide here. Yeah, we currently operate a convenience store and fuel station at the corner of State Street and Pierce Park Lane, which is about half a mile east of this site, of the new site we're proposing. That store will soon have to close due to an ACHD project that will realign Pierce Park through our site, so that will be a condemned site in the future. And we anticipate it to happen very soon. We are excited about the development opportunity for this new site location, which we will be considering this to be a good replacement location for that one. And we also, it'd be a good replacement store for our employees and will allow us to serve our established customers along this stretch of the State Street corridor. So our vision for this new site is to repurpose a perfectly good building, the existing retail building that exists, into a convenience store rather than tear it down. We have carefully designed the site around that building to be sensitive to our surrounding neighbors and provide an attractive and pedestrian-friendly presence along State Street. We feel that requiring the building to be torn down kind of places an unnecessary financial burden on a business without significant benefit to the community. I just wanted to also address from the design review hearing 2 months ago, just wanted to address concerns brought forward from our residential neighbor across State Street south of our property. I met on site with that neighbor about a week ago, and I learned their primary concern is with regards to vehicle activity that will happen at night on that site, specifically regarding headlights shining through their windows because their residents are directly across the street. I just wanted to note for the record that Jackson's has agreed with that neighbor to provide additional landscape consultation and funding for additional landscape screening along their property frontage to reduce this impact. That's, of course, if we are to gain approval tonight. So we thank you for your consideration of our project and ask for your approval of the site design as proposed. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deb Nelson.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. Deborah Nelson, 601 West Bannock Street in Boise, here on behalf of the applicant team. I'll start with a very brief overview of the project, and then I'll focus on the key issue in the appeal, which is whether the design guidelines require the applicant to demolish and relocate the existing building to the street front. This new site is located on State Street near Glenwood. It is adjacent to the large Albertsons commercial complex to the northwest and a bank to the southeast, which shares access through the site to the internal drive lanes and to State Street. Immediately adjacent to the northeast is a residential neighborhood. The site is zoned C2D, and convenience store with gasoline service is an allowed use in the zone. So the use itself is not at issue here, only design review approval is required. Jackson's proposes to remodel the existing building and make additional site improvements to accommodate the planned convenience store with gasoline service use. Repurposing the building will minimize costs and unnecessary use of building materials consistent with the city's sustainable design principles in the comp plan. The building also helps to shield the adjacent residences from the activity of the fuel pumps, which would otherwise be located right next to their backyards. The plan maintains cross-access through the site for adjacent commercial uses. Significant landscaping will be installed around the trash enclosure and the outdoor seating area along the northeast border. Along with the existing attached sidewalk along State Street, Jackson's will add a new 12-foot detached multi-use pathway, landscaping on both sides of the pathway, and a low decorative wall to soften the appearance of the fueling area. New sidewalks and crosswalks will run along both sides of the site to provide pedestrian connections between that multi-use pathway and the store and seating area. In this site plan, without the landscaping, you can see those site improvements, including the outdoor seating area, fuel pumps and canopy, multi-use pathway, and sidewalks along both sides of the site. In this perspective facing northeast, you can see the detached multi-use pathway and connecting sidewalk along the northwest border. This slide shows a context rendering of the site facing northwest, so you can see the power lines that are existing and run along that frontage. Based on discussions with the design review staff, the fuel canopy was designed with a flat roof with clean lines to mirror the massing of the building behind it. This helps it to fade into the appearance of the building behind while also bringing an architectural element toward the street front. You can see here the outdoor seating area that includes an open pergola structure. So the project report found that the plan meets all of the design review criteria except compliance with the design guidelines. It concludes the site improvements, enhanced pedestrian and bike connectivity. The building's massing and articulation are compatible with buildings in the area. The colors, materials, and other architectural details are all appropriate. Sufficient parking is provided for the use, and the landscape plan complies with the code requirements. Staff's and the Design Review Commission's decisions, their only objection was with compliance with the street frontage standards in the design guidelines. They argue that the guidelines require the applicant to demolish and relocate the building to be at the state street frontage. As we've described in our appeal briefing to you, that is not required by the design guidelines. In fact, the language in the guidelines is very clear about what is required and is not required for a building remodel and associated site improvements. So I want to spend a few minutes to walk through those. The design guidelines begin with a description of how to use them and how they apply to different types of development. On page Romanet 4, the guidelines direct you to the applicable standards on page Romanet 6 for additions, remodels, and site improvements associated with them. This is exactly what's at issue in this application, a building remodel and associated site improvements. When we look at the reference standards on page Romanet 6, the guidelines describe 3 different levels of improvements and the applicable requirements for each. Level 1 improvements include all exterior remodels, building additions, and/or site improvements that affect the exterior appearance of the building, site, and/or increase the building's gross floor area by up to 50%. This is what is planned here: an exterior remodel and site improvements that affect the exterior appearance of the building and site. The project does not include any increase to the building's gross floor area. Note that the guidelines discuss the expansion here in terms of the building's gross floor area, not the development footprint that staff referenced. The guidelines then explain the requirements for level 1 improvements, which is only that the proposed improvements meet the standards and do not lead to further nonconformance with the standards. The guidelines provide an example of what that means. If an owner replaces a building's facade siding, then the siding must meet the standards. But elements such as the building articulation are not required. So the new improvement, the siding, is subject to the standards, but changes to the existing building, such as its shape, are not required. There is certainly no requirement to demolish and relocate the building for an exterior remodel. We do not have level 2 improvements here, but it is instructive to look at these standards. Level 2 improvements increase the building's gross floor area by more than 50%, but not greater than 100%. Level 2 improvements must meet all standards that do not involve repositioning the building or reconfiguring site development. The outdoor seating area with pergola and the fuel canopy are not buildings under the city code or design guidelines. They do not have walls or enclose any space. They do not have gross floor area or facades or entries or windows. But even if you did take the position that these structures effectively increase the existing building's gross floor area, the increase is less than 100%. And there's still no requirement with level 2 improvements to demolish and relocate the building. To the contrary, the guidelines expressly state that no standards would require repositioning the building or reconfiguring the site would apply. Level 3 improvements. also not at issue here. These increase a building's gross floor area by more than 100%, and these must conform to all applicable standards. Even in level 3, the guidelines do not require the existing building to be demolished and relocated, but rather simply require the addition to comply by extending to the street, as you can see in Figure 1.2, where the guidelines provide examples of each level. Staff has argued in their response to Jackson's appeal memo and tonight in their presentation that the site improvements alone somehow trigger the block frontage standards such that the existing building to be remodeled must comply, and that is simply not the case. To recap the key language here, the guidelines direct the applicable standards for additions, remodels, and site improvements associated with them. And level 1 improvements include all exterior remodels, building additions, and/or site improvements. The proposed building remodel and site improvements are all part of a single project in a single design review application and a single allowed use, convenience store with gasoline service. Staff statement that this is new development doesn't change these standards. The guidelines are contemplating new site development with the building remodel in all of the applicable language. There simply is no language or circumstance in the guidelines that requires an existing building to be demolished and relocated regardless of the scope of the site improvements. Staff points to the intent of the guidelines to support their position rather than specific language in the guidelines. But the intent of the guidelines is clear. Only standards that do not require reshaping or repositioning a building or reconfiguring site development apply when you're dealing with a site that has existing development. The Design Review Commission's decision erroneously applies these guidelines to require Jackson to relocate the building to the street. The decision is an error, and we ask you to approve the appeal and the design review application as presented, and we'd stand for any questions.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Deb. We'll hold on questions for just a minute. First, we'll check in with the Pierce Park Neighborhood Association to see if anybody is present. Are you? Yeah. Okay. So we'll get your testimony after we wrap up questions, and then we'll hear from you folks during regular testimony. Okay, looks like we don't have anybody representing the Pierce Park Neighborhood Association present, so we'll go ahead and open up this item for any questions by the commission to either staff or the applicant.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie, please.
so there's a couple complicated issues, and I just want to ask a couple questions to start first to the city. In the design review guidelines, it in fact does say on Roman page 6, how do building additions and how are they applied? And I think we've discussed that language. Specifically says for building additions, remodels, and site improvements. Is it the city's position that this is neither an addition, a remodel, or a site improvement?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gillespie, yes, that is the city's stance that this would be neither a remodel, an addition, or a site improvement, rather new improvements to a undeveloped site.
Is it, Mr. Chairman?
Mm-hmm.
So is it the city's position that in part you're calling it an undeveloped site because there's two parcels? And I guess my rhetorical question is to the city, suppose the applicant had gone ahead and passed an had gotten approval to consolidate the two lots through whatever the opposite of minor land division is, record of survey or whatever process that they go through to combine the two lots. So let's say it was one property. Would the city's position change, or would it still be that this is in fact new development on the quote-unquote site?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gillespie, so our position is that the fact that this development is a new use on a large portion of undeveloped land that would require a significant amount of improvements to the site. It is our position that we don't see how it would be a remodel or an addition or additional site improvements, and that is the development of the site regardless of whether or not it's one parcel.
So even if this was one parcel, your view would remain the same?
Yes.
Okay. Next question, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout both the appeal report as well as the original planning division, the original DRH report, you did use the word remodel several times to describe, in part, the activity here. So, and clearly there is a component here that's a remodel. Does the city agree that, at least as far as the existing building is going, the applicant is proposing to remodel it?
Yes, so, and when we are using remodel, they're remodeling the existing commercial building
Right.
for use as the convenience store.
Mhm.
And the portion of the site that we're talking about that we don't consider remodeling is all of the new development improvements, if you will, to.
The fuel pumps and the canopy.
Correct, drive aisles, parking, new
Okay.
landscaping.
Mr. Chairman?
Mhm.
So I'm trying to understand why you're making that distinction. Let me give you another. If an application came that looked as follows, so suppose someone buys this property, integrates it together. So we take out the fact that it's two parcels. It's one site. And I think historically, we've always on this commission looked at multi-parcel development as a single site. Suppose someone wanted to remodel and expand that building to make it a daycare. In order to comply with the daycare provisions, they would have to add outdoor space, which they would do right in front of the building, headed towards State Street. And then they have parking and drop-off requirements in the code too. So suppose they wanted to put the parking lot and the drop-off next to the street because they didn't want to put the open space next to the street because of kids and stuff. So now the order is kind of like daycare in the back, then a zone of open space, daycare required, basically, playground, and then the parking and drop off. Would your position be the same, that constitutes a significant site improvement if all they're really doing in that front parcel is put in a parking lot and maybe part of that play lot? Like how are you? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gillespie, I appreciate the question. However, I can't deal in rhetorical questions at this point just because I don't have that project scope or project in front of me. Obviously, we have to look at these on an individual case-by-case basis based off of what's before us and the site. So I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Mr. Chairman?
Mhm.
So what about a case where somebody simply wanted to expand the parking lot of the existing building into that undeveloped space? Would that still not comply if it was just parking lot expansion?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gillespie, I believe we look at that as a parking lot expansion. And again, that would be a different project that I would need to sit down or staff would sit down and evaluate at that time. So again, I don't have a clear answer for that as well. But if you're talking about a parking lot expansion, that's might be a little bit different than what we're talking about here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thanks, Mo. Thanks, Rachel.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore, please.
I know this is based on the table of allowed uses and more of a use question, but this is for staff. So the convenience store, the existing building, that's a convenience store use, that doesn't fall under the service station use, correct? Is it like a retail use? I know you're on design review.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Moore, so it's gasoline service, I have it. It's convenience store with gasoline service is the use under the use table per the legacy code. And it combines it as one use.
Okay. All right. And Mr. Chair.
Mhm.
So as part of that use, and it doesn't have a specific standard in the C2 zone, but so as part of that use, it's kind of expected that you have one of these little one of the canopy things associated with it. Is that correct? I don't know.
I think gasoline service might include the canopy, yes.
But Mr. Chair,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily always include the canopy because I've seen some gas stations
That
around here
don't
that
have it.
don't.
Yeah.
So, is the general issue here not necessarily, I think it has to do partially with the parking lot, but if this station did not have the canopy, would the issue still be the same as it is presented currently?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Moore, I'm gonna have to consult on an answer to that. If you hold just one moment, please. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Moore, so, as we're reviewing against the design review standards tonight, I can't speak to the use, and then that would be related to the use under this circumstance.
So, Mr. Chair.
Please. Yeah.
So in terms of the design review guidelines, I suppose, it's not just the canopy that's the issue. It's the canopy plus the modifications to the parking area. That's the issue that's triggering this.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Moore, yes, that is correct.
So, Mr. Chair.
Mhm.
So this kind of falls under 110705, which is the use regulations for landscaping, fences, walls, and screening. And so if you go to 2A, the landscape plan, it looks like it kind of falls under number 5 under there with the existing parking lots. And it says 51 to 100% expansion or replacement of the parking lot must comply with all the requirements of the section. And one of the requirements of the section is the adopted streetscape plan. So is that kind of where this is? It's not necessarily the canopy issue, it's the modifications to the parking plus the canopy. That's kind of where this is starting from, and then it kind of goes from there. Is that generally correct?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Moore, it's, so it starts with, you're on the right track. It starts with the improvement to the site. And in the design review guidelines, it calls out, based off of the improvements that you do to the site, where the building placement shall go and where the parking shall be located. I had a slide in my presentation that, which I can pull up if you need to see, shows what that improvement should look like on that block frontage, the commercial mixed-use block frontage. And so, but it does start with the improvement that they're doing to the site, which then triggers what exactly applies in the design review guidelines.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Milt, and as you get started, Milt, Rachel, would you mind just pulling up like a current site plan while Milt's queuing up his question?
I'm ready.
Do it.
I'm queued. So this is also a question for the city. Page 15, chapter 2, the block frontages and community design guidelines, it lays out the 4 different kinds of block frontages. Ready? So it lays out 4 different kinds of block frontages: storefront, commercial mixed use, landscaped, and other block frontages. This is, there's 4 squares, page 15 of those design guidelines. Gas stations is clearly shown in other block frontages, greatest flexibility in buildings and parking lot locations. And in fact, the previous page, or figure 2.7, says that there are no parking lot location restrictions for other block frontages. But it seems to be the city's arguing that this must be a commercial frontage, even though the use gas station shows in other frontages. And the basis for that is these maps that are found in the citywide guidelines. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Where
Mr.
the purple lines are, basically.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gillespie, yes, that's correct. So the maps depict where these block frontages apply. And so this location requires a commercial mixed-use block frontage.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Rachel, could you show us a existing aerial?
Not very good.
We got terrible eyesight.
It's just an empty, the frontage, there it is. That frontage
Right.
on State is just flat ground with nothing on it.
Right, but I'm glad
They're
you pulled.
spraying it for weeds.
I'm glad you pulled this one up there, Rachel, because it shows essentially what are the, I don't know if the lot consolidation has gone through yet or not, but this was the original lot configuration, correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
So it's the city's per the design guidelines and per as that site has been developed to date, it's clearly identified as a building pad between the parking lot and the sidewalk and the streetscape. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
So as this was platted, and as we're seeing today, the intention would be that there would be a building within that 20-foot setback per the design guidelines. And so the rub that we're facing today is that the design guidelines contemplate a building expansion, but they don't contemplate a site expansion. Is that a safe summary?
Mr. Chair, can you repeat that
Well,
question?
Well,
or summary?
they've processed a lot consolidation, which therefore makes their property larger, right? The lot, as the applicant and Deb pointed out, right, in her testimony, the design guidelines talk about building expansions and how you manage an expansion of a building per the design guidelines. However, the site has gotten larger in this instance because of the lot consolidation. The building's staying the same size, but the lot has gotten larger and is mostly undeveloped at this point. And I mean, is that basically the summary of where we're at?
Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. But just note for the record that the lots have not been consolidated as of today.
Okay. Okay. You guys are awfully quiet.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question
No.
for the applicant, for
Yeah.
the entitlement specialist.
That's good. I have some questions for her as well.
I
So-
love that title. I think I'm going to call.
That's
never
your
mind.
title, not mine. Your title for me.
Sorry, just, so you've heard the city's analysis of why, this doesn't, fit into the language on Romans 6 that, about the levels. In particular, the city seems to be arguing that the gas service, gas court and canopy is not a site improvement, it's new development. Can you provide your counter argument on why you think this is a remodel and site improvement?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Gillespie, yes. I mean, honestly, I have a hard time understanding and following the staff's argument to specifically address every aspect of it because it doesn't point to any language that is in the guidelines about what level improvements, how they are described here, whether level 1, level 2, level 3, they just aren't fitting their position into any of the language that is here. There's nothing in the guidelines that justifies a discussion of a portion of the site improvements as just so expansive or an expansion, the increase in the development footprint. None of that language is in the design guidelines. That's just not how it is treated. I mean, as the chairman just pointed out, it does discuss the expansion in terms of the building, not in terms of expansion of site. And and staff agreed, and that's been their position throughout, that the lot consolidation piece of it isn't what's driving their analysis. That just isn't an issue. This is the site that the applicant has come forward with for this use. So it wouldn't make sense for you to take a portion of the site and consider that. This is the site that's proposed. This entire use, one single use will take up the entire site. We aren't saving a building pad for a separate use. We aren't proposing two uses to one be at the front, one be at the back. This is one use. And it involves one building, and that building already exists on the site. So there is no expansion. There is a building remodel, and now there are site improvements. And, we went through the analysis and the calculation to show you, well, what if you did count the canopy, even though there's no, support for counting that? Even then, we're a level 1 improvement. Or if you say a level 2 improvement, if you count all of it and add it up, you still don't move the building. So there just isn't support in the guidelines for their view. We do not disagree with staff's position that if this were a new building completely, if there wasn't a building there, if there's just a new development, we don't fall under this section of the guidelines then. And we would have to build our only new building at the street front. But that's just not what this site has. It has an existing building, and so we fall under a different section of the guidelines. Any additional questions?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Deb. It really is interesting, right? So page, I want to get your input on, the design guidelines. I'm not going to get into level 1, level 2, level 3, right? Let's just get right into commercial/mixed use block frontage standards, page 21, city design guidelines. Building placement, maximum building setback shall be 20 feet. What is your response there? Because clearly we're well beyond 20 feet with the location of this building.
Right, but that setback applies to the building, and the guidelines do not require us to move an existing building.
Okay.
That's the direction right from the beginning, is what happens if you have an addition, remodel, or site improvements associated with them, and then what happens otherwise? You're in the category of, we just come in and we're ready to build a convenience store, period. Not remodel, just build. And then this would apply. And I would note that even when you have a new building, there's variety in the setbacks. You can get departures. There's a lot of different standards. You can use the storefront or the landscape version, and then you have different rules. None of that applies here to the building. The building placement is not subject to that.
Okay. Anyone else?
But I'm trying to online.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Mhm.
So just a few questions of staff. The intent is for this to essentially replicate what is built in Harris Ranch, which is a gas station located on an arterial, I think, collector roughly, with the convenience store pulled up to the corner and the pumps out back and pathways on both sides. That's the intent of what staff is basically saying because of what is in the mixed use block frontage design standard. Is that the gist of it?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Danley, so the commercial mixed-use block frontage is how we review this site.
Right. Okay. I get what you're saying. So the other point of this is, I think that I want to make sure I'm understanding. The applicant has said repeatedly, make sure I'm understanding what you said clearly here, is that to demolish the building as a condition of approval. I think that what I'm not understanding you say is that that's not necessarily the case, but that yes, if the building was was moved to the front and the islands in the back, then it would be approved. But it's not necessarily a condition of approval, right? I mean, I think that's what I'm hearing, two different arguments from both sides here.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Danley, that is correct. There's no condition of approval per the design review application action letter that
Right.
requires a demolition of a building or a construction of a new building.
Because if the applicant was proposing to construct a second building, we wouldn't be having this discussion. It's because it's a fuel island that is an auto-centric use, which is what State Street and the millions of dollars this city has put towards studying that corridor to change the standards to get away from that. That's what we're trying to do. And that's what our code and that's what our design standards are attempting to do. So if it was a building, it wouldn't be an issue, but because it's a fuel island that is arguably, not enhancing the environment that we're seeking to build, that's at issue here. And because it doesn't comply with our standards, that's the gist.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Danley, was there a question or just?
Assuming the building is placed.
No, and that's
Mr.
what I'm
Chairman,
struggling with, is trying
Mr.
to
Chairman,
formulate this into a question.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
I do
Bill.
think it's important to understand the design review committee does not deal with uses,
Fine, right.
right?
Right.
So whether, it's auto-centric or not auto-centric, that's a use question that just in the allowed uses in the zone. So
We could argue they go hand in glove. That
fine,
that
but
the two
the
are
design
trying to
review
work
is
sympathetically.
specifically prohibited from
Right.
that. Right? And so I think, Commissioner Danley, what the applicant is arguing, they are exempt
Right.
from all of the block facing requirements because it's a remodel and site improvement and not a greenfield development. And there, that says the location and design of the addition, remodel, and site improvement shall be consistent with block frontage provisions, except in cases where the existing building is set back too far from the street to physically allow the addition's conformance. So what they're saying is that exemption or clause applies to them. And the city is saying basically, no, it doesn't. You're not a remodel or site improvement. You're essentially greenfield development that must comply. That's the gist of the debate tonight.
Yeah.
Whether
And
it's
let's-
auto or
Yeah, use is not.
daycare
Well, I don't think
or
nobody's debating the use. right?
laundry center.
Yeah, no,
it's-
I get
that's
that.
it.
I understand
That's
that,
the
but I also
whole-
understand the history of State Street, having going back nearly 2 decades of all of the attempts of what is trying to occur on this corridor. So we can't ignore, I think, a lot of the history and the incredible hard work by lots of agencies, including our own and staffs going back years and years, of what is attempted and what's trying to be codified within our design standards as well. So that, I mean, that's what I'm trying to understand here. Okay.
Let's see if we can't get back to questions to staff and the applicant while we're still not yet in deliberation.
Mr. Chairman,
Tony, yeah, please.
this question is for staff. This is just for information's sake. What used to be in that State Street adjacent lot before it was a dirt lot or before this development?
Is there,
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Torres, I don't have the answer for that right now. But we can look into it and get back to you.
Rachel, I'm going to play devil's advocate just because you're up and I have this question. And we've had a couple other ideas thrown out there, but let's play out if let's say this site was leveled, they come in, Jackson's comes in, there's no building there, Jackson comes in, the application, city wants the building 20 feet at the street, fuel canopy goes in the back. We've got residential homes adjacent to that back property line. Any thoughts on detrimental impact to the neighboring properties with having the fuel canopy in the back of the property or on the side of the property for that matter.
Mr. Chair, so in this case, it would be required of the applicant to buffer between the different land uses. This commercial auto-oriented use versus the residential neighborhood. So in best practice, they should be buffering, i.e. landscaping. We have specific guidelines for what type of buffer is required, fencing, et cetera. So if that was the proposal, just like with this proposal, we would ask that there would be some buffering between the different uses.
Okay. Is that the city's, I don't know, I mean, it would be in new code territory. Would it be the city's intention that the canopy would be in the back versus to the side of the building if they can make it fit? I mean, I know I'm playing with what ifs, but I'm just.
Mr. Chair, are you referencing the building placement?
Mm-hmm. And if they came in with a new project, is the city's desire to have the canopy behind the building, or could you beside it towards the street?
Mr. Chair, I guess the city's desire would be that the building placement is in the front.
In front,
So where they place the fuel canopy, I think would be up to site constrictions. But we don't have a preference. Like I said, we would really just look at buffering and between the different uses.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I'd also like to add, Crystal did a little research and we didn't find anything going back to the 80s on that site.
So undeveloped.
Undeveloped.
Okay.
That is correct.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have any more questions, Chris? No. Okay. Good. Okay, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, guys. Okay, we'll go ahead and open up testimony. I have Peggy Olea. Olay, come on up, please, Miss Olay. Podium is yours. You have 3 minutes. If you can start with your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name's Peggy Olay. I'm the president of the Plantation View Condominium Association. And with me is Heather McGinnis, our board vice president. We are the 12-unit condo complex located at 6881 West State Street, directly across the street from the proposed Jackson's gas station and convenience store. So that's my residence. We're realistic and recognize that this parcel will ultimately be developed. We feel Jackson's has done a very nice job of mitigating the impact of their business, both to the residences adjacent to the project and to State Street. They've gone above what is required with attractive landscaping to create an aesthetically pleasing street view. We also agree that the repurposing of an existing building is a wise use of resources. We want a project that will ultimately be a positive addition to the entire neighborhood, including those of us who reside across the street. When ACHD took a 10 to 20-foot easement from the front of our property in 2016, they removed a 5-foot fence and very tall bushes and left us with very few options to mitigate the impact of increased traffic and noise on our units that face State Street. In light of our concerns, and as Mr. Stamm mentioned, Jackson's has reached out to us with a plan for enhanced landscaping in front of our complex that will provide a barrier to the impact of their development to the south side. We're very appreciative of this offer, and absent the option to replace fencing, we feel it is a realistic solution to our dilemma. We know it's not a requirement of the project, and we respect Jackson's efforts to be a good neighbor, and we'll hope you will allow this project to continue. And we already have an awful lot of vehicle traffic coming in and out of that subdivision as it is with drive-through food places and things like that. So I don't know that traffic is the issue for us. It's more the lighting and the increased traffic, but there already is a lot of traffic and it's a busy street. So thank you for your consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I see Mr. Stom also signed up, but I assume you're good with your, okay, very good. Is there anybody else who would like to testify tonight? Okay. And staff, do we have anybody online on this? Get to my screen. If you're online and would like to testify, please raise your hand. Okay, very good. We'll go ahead and close public testimony. Deb, come on up for rebuttal.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. I can keep this really short, given the limited and supportive testimony. But just to try to address, Commissioner Danley, some of your questions and comments there and some others that kind of came up there at the end. I guess I think it is important to just focus in on exactly what is before you, that this is an appeal of the Design Review Commission's decision. And so it is technical in orientation about whether they did not follow the standards that were applicable to the development. Because you had commented that this isn't really about a condition of approval on the building. I mean, in fact, the setup is that it was recommended for denial and denied. So it's not a condition of approval to relocate the building. It's a denial of the use at all of the entire design review application. And so the presented design review application is denied. So with that standard, that decision, the basis for it has no merit within the design guidelines. They point to the general block frontage standard in the guidelines, but no specifics, no evaluation of the level 1, 2, or 3 improvements, no discussion of how a building remodel is treated. And the intent, to the extent it is a reliance on the general intentions of the guidelines, the intention is made clear in exactly how to deal with these building additions and remodels. I mean, if the guidelines aren't requiring you to add articulation to a building when you resurface the facade, they're certainly not asking you to move that building or denying that remodel to take place as it is. It is still a single use and a single design review application site. And so all of the site improvements that are associated with that use are part of this application. This isn't bifurcated. The lot consolidation is not part of the Design Review Commission's criteria that's being considered. The site is designed well. All of the project report description of the site improvements was favorable. It just comes down to the single issue of the block frontage requirements, and the guidelines simply do not require the building to be located at the front. So with that, we'll stand. I don't think you asked me more questions at this point, but I'm available.
I think we're good there. Thanks,
Thank you.
Deb. Thank you. Okay, we're going to bring this back before the commission. Again, DRH 23 dash 388. Let me know how you're feeling.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
I'll take a shot at it.
Okay.
I move that we deny the appeal on DRH 23-388 for the reasons stated in the staff report.
Second.
Okay. Thank you. I have a motion to deny by Commissioner Moore with a second by Commissioner Danley. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Please.
So from my standpoint, it is a little bit muddy, but I think the way that it's the most clear for me is when I go to chapter 1107-05. And it talks about, landscaping, fences and screening. And I go to the landscape plan, which is kind of buried in there a little bit. It sort of starts to get to when this requirement is being triggered. And specifically, I think it's really starting to describe the scale of the site improvements that are triggering the requirement for this block frontage, even though there is a remodel. And so what I'm really looking at in 110705 is 2A and then 5D. It's kind of varied. Yeah. So basically this lists a bunch. So 110705 2A kind of lists a bunch of requirements for the landscape plan. Preparation, applicability, adopted streetscape plans, uses and buildings, and then number 5 is existing parking lots. And so item D is 51 to 100% expansion or replacement of the parking lot must comply with all requirements of this section. One requirement of the section is the adopted streetscape plan. And so I think, in my mind, I think that that kind of tracks what the city is requiring or is saying, and that it's the scope of the site improvements that's triggering this new development. It's the scope of the development that's triggering this requirement for, these streetscape requirements. And so I'm comfortable with the city's logic behind that. I follow the logic on the landscape plan requirements right here, and how that kind of trickles through in the design review guidelines. And for those reasons, I'll be supporting the motion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Any other discussion or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Danley?
I'll be pretty brief. I think Commissioner Moore hit on a really good point. I think that our design review committee reviewed this considerably and thoroughly, and made an agreement and made an argument that the staff backs up. And I think we honor that. And frankly, I think that another piece of it that came right out of the applicant's presentation was this notion of soften the appearance of the fuel area. I think this whole point is the staff is saying our design standards are that we're not just softening something, that we're preventing it from happening in the first place, which is codified in our design standards. I agree that this is a major expansion on a parcel, on a particular part of a parcel that you can see even by the area, I think backs up what Commissioner Moore is talking about, has never had a structure on it. And therefore it does trigger additional options that come, or additional requirements rather, that come out of our design standards. I think in this instance, we back up staff. I think their logic makes sense. And we're trying to do something different, which is exactly why we have the standards that we do. So for those reasons, I'll be supportive of the motion.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Danley. Any other thoughts?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie?
so I'll be opposing the motion. I'll refer to packet page 7, page 405 of the report, the last sentence, second paragraph, where they're discussing why they think this is essentially new development. The staff report says, last two sentences, quote, "The building additions and remodeled standards are not intended to apply to a project where the development footprint is expanding substantially and encompassing new land area. In this specific case, the current vacant land area along State Street is subject to evaluation as new development, and the level 1 thresholds referenced by the appellant are not applicable." I just don't see any basis in code for that argument. There's nowhere in our design standards where the phrase remodel or site improvement are qualified by size. That's the part of the code we're acting in, not the landscape part of the code. So it just says, and we can agree that it's vague code, but it does not provide any qualification of what isn't a site improvement. It just says site improvements. It just says remodels. The remodeling is qualified by the percentage expansion of the building, but the site improvements are not. So I don't understand the phrase, the code wasn't intended for substantial expansion in encompassing new land area. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. Of course, most site improvements are going to expand into, quote, new land area or or, vacant land. We've never considered that as a problem for where the parking lot goes. We never said, well, that land's vacant, so they can't do that. And then the other question is, and again, I feel strongly about this, we generally speaking consider multi-parcel applications as one site. And so to say that, well, that part of the site is a remodel and this part of the site isn't, we don't typically split sites from the way the code speaks about them. So I think it's one site. I think it's a remodel with site improvements. I think per the code, it's a level 1 improvement. And I think clearly they're not required to move the building in order to build what they want to build. I don't particularly like the result of it. I understand what Chris's argument is, or Commissioner Danley's, but I think the code is, we're reading too much into the code. The city is putting stuff into the code language that's just not there. So for that reason, I can't support the motion.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gillespie.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Doan, yeah.
I'm going to follow along with Commissioner Gillespie's logic. I believe that it is just a site remodel. It's not two separate things. So the conversation that Commissioner Gillespie just gave, I track with what he's saying. So I'm going to be not voting in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Torres, yeah.
I'm going to just echo that I find both what Commissioner Moore and Commissioner Gillespie said compelling. I'm kind of going back and forth on it. I'm also conflicted because the front lot hasn't had anything for at least 35 to 40 years. And, possibly under the modern zoning code, that'll be easier to develop in the future, but it's been a dirt lot for a long time as well. So I'm kind of going back and forth. I can be persuaded as of right now, probably either way. So I'd love to hear what others think.
Sounds like
We're all done persuading. We get one soliloquy and then we're done.
that's it. A lot of it's out there. Please, Commissioner Seha.
Mr. Chairman, I will be supporting the motion.
Okay, very good. Well, as much like the design review hearing, there's a lot of debate and discussion in that hearing as well, right? It is a really interesting one. It really is, Yeah, I think I'm going to be in favor of the motion as well. I certainly understand both sides of the argument. However, I think it's pretty clear. I hear what Commissioner Gillespie was indicating with his testimony, but I think it's pretty clear the intent of the design guidelines and the intent of the development that's there to date and what the intention of that street-facing parcel was intended to do. So I don't find any error. I don't know if we really talked too much about like finding any error, which we don't have to, but I know that I understand the struggle that design review is having as well with this, right? We're having the same struggle. So yeah, let's leave it there. Unless there's any other final comments, we'll go ahead and call the roll. Again, we have a motion to deny the appeal, and the motion was by Commissioner Moore, and the second was by Commissioner Danley. Will the clerk please call it?
Schaefer,
Yes.
Danley,
Yes.
Gillespie,
No.
Moore,
Yes.
Seha,
Yes.
Torres,
Yes.
okay,
Yes, yeah.
Doan,
No.
5 in favor, 2 opposed, motion carries.
Okay. All right. Thanks, you guys. Your bladder's strong. You want to keep rolling? We only got one more. Okay. All right. Let's go to item number 2, CFH 23-102, City of Boise Parks and Rec Department, 5417 West Wiley Lane, river system permit to repair erosion along more than 100 lineal feet of riverbank and more than 1/2 acre of Class A land on 1.15 acres in A1 zone. Mr. David Mosier, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The applicant is requesting a river system permit to repair approximately over 100 linear feet, or about 150 linear feet of erosion damage along the bank of the Boise River between Wiley Lane to the south, Lake Harbor cul-de-sac, and Greenbelt access to the north, as you can see on the aerial photograph. The subject property is 1.14 acres in size and it's zoned A1 zone. The applicant's requesting approval of a river system permit to repair the erosion damage to the riverbank adjacent to the Greenbelt. And as you can see from the photos, the Greenbelt has experienced significant erosion damage, which has started to occur around 2017 high flow river events and has drastically worsened over time. The project is comprised of two phases. The first phase includes the repair of the erosion damage and the removal of the major source of continued erosion. To prevent further damage to the Greenbelt infrastructure and to protect public health and safety, this repair project was considered an emergency by the city of Boise and was required to be completed before the 2024 spring high flow events. As such, the riverbank repair and channel alteration has already been completed. The second phase of the project includes the project remediation habitat restoration, which is anticipated to occur later this summer and next year. This slide shows the riverbank stabilization project design, which includes repairing the scour hole and altering the Boise River channel so that the main river current is not directed right at the damaged riverbank. Phase 2 of the project includes mitigating for the loss of 3 trees on site and the planting of 132-inch caliper trees throughout the entire park system. In addition, it will include other large-scale restoration projects located within this section of the Boise River Reach. Conditions of approval require these large restoration projects be submitted to the PDS department and other agencies for review. The goals of these restoration projects are to enhance the aquatic habitat and improve water quality within the Boise River by focusing on temperature and sediment mitigation. Just to give an idea, this is essentially, you can see the scour hole that was being repaired along here. And then they also sort of did some channel alteration out here to redirect the river flow so it isn't going straight into that riverbank or into that riverbank.
David, is that picture abstract art or is that actually,
This is actually showing
what the hell is that?
So give you an idea. So it is showing the
Where's-
contourings of the proposed repairs that to the scour hole. So you can see the green belts here, the damaged section of the green belt kind of runs up here and is
Okay.
eaten away. This is currently the bank or the toe where it just falls off into the river.
So that's where it's been scoured out,
It's
right
been
there.
scoured out right through here. This
Okay.
is the hole.
Thank you.
And then you can see the channel force, the river current goes right into this area and just been eating this thing out over years. I apologize. It is a bit hard to see.
You guys are lying. if
never-
You think you understand that.
He's
Joe.
been on planning and zoning for like a decade, but he doesn't know what topo lines are.
The planning team has received correspondence today.
Sorry, I'm sorry. We're in David's presentation. We're in David's presentation. Sorry,
Mr.
Dave.
Chair, members of the commission, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. The planning team received correspondence today from the public expressing concerns with some of the work performed to repair the erosion damage. These include that the riverbank repair project exceeded the scope of the work and removed gravel from the bar right here. This bar is not necessarily down in the area where the scour hole and the alterations occur, but you can see that it does show where the coffer bank or the coffer dams were connecting into it so they can dewater the area. Based on the information we received the planning team has noted that the additional gravel that was removed from this bar, which was the general concern that this bar has been removed, was needed in order to firm up the coffer dams. Apparently, when they were initially installing them, the original design wasn't going to work, so they had to remove some additional gravel to make sure these coffer dams would not fail, so they can dewater. So that is kind of what the concern is from the public, from a member of the public, is that this gravel bar has been removed and that the material was used to put these coffer dams in. And then when later the coffer dams were demolished, that material that was in later spread out over the channel bed. So this gravel bar has been altered and was not initially part of the original scope. In conclusion, though, the planning team does recommend approval of the application. It does comply with the code. The additional work was required in order to complete the project. It complied with the engineer responded to this and noted that it does comply with all their 404 permitting from the Corps of Engineers and from the state, in the sense that no additional, all the material removed complies with the standards that the Corps of Engineers and the state had agreed upon. They also note that the gravel bar has changed, but is substantially still there. Although you can't really see it right now because the high water has buried it. At this point, that's basically the information I received from Jacobs Engineer regarding that. And I just received that today. Thank you.
Okay. David, thank you. And sorry for the interruptions during
no
your
problem.
presentation. We have a very short agenda. We get excited. Parks is the applicant. Just want to come on up.
Chairman Schaefer,
Mhm.
Commissioners, my name is Trevor Kestner. I'm a Parks Planner with the Parks Department. My business address is 1104 Royal Boulevard, Boise, 83706. There's not much I could add to what Mr. Moser has explained already. The work for this project, the first phase of this project has been completed already. The planning director provided an emergency approval to basically go in the river and make these changes and fortify the bank before the water came up this spring. So with regard to the inquiry that the city received as far as like the sandbar removal, I did receive the same correspondence that Mr. Moser received from Jacobs Engineering, who was the contracted engineer on the job. And they stated that the use of, I guess, super blocks is what they were attempting to use, was unsuccessful in diverting the water away from the project. So this was not directed by the engineer, but a lot of the material that basically comprised what was seen as the gravel bar was moved around. But once the water recedes, you'll probably anticipate seeing multiple threads on the river. But just to make the point of the Planning and Zoning Commission's purview, the Boise River System Ordinance directs the applicant to take their plans, their riverbank plans from the 6,500 CFS watermark, 70 feet setback from that area. So that's basically the river system ordinance jurisdiction to make sure that, we take care of the riparian natural resource values and basically protect public property and safety. So the first phase of this project, as I said, has been completed and the bank repair has been done. So the second phase would be engaging with our river restoration partners like Boise River Enhancement Network, Idaho Fish and Game, the Water Resources Division, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to figure out the best way to mitigate for this kind of bank armoring that we've had to do to prevent further scouring. So I do understand that there were some decisions that were made outside of the engineering's ideal situation when the contractor was in the river. But again, I can't speak to, I'm not an engineer, I can't speak to what kinds of decisions would have been made or needed to be made to basically move that material around to change the river's dynamics to not further incise that specific area of the riverbank. So I'll stand for any additional questions you might have.
Okay. I think we're good right now, Trevor.
All right.
Thank you. I guess we don't have a neighborhood association, so we can just move into questions if there are any by the commission.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mil.
My understanding's always been that the city itself doesn't have jurisdiction of what happens in the river. Is that right? Like all this gravel bar stuff, that's in the middle of the river. Our jurisdiction ends at, some state defined limit.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that like when you get into the middle of the river and that
The
you are
sandbar?
correct in the sense that it's more of the state jurisdiction that would state water resources and the Army Corps at that point that have a lot more jurisdiction than the city would have in that area. Our river system ordinance is designed to basically protect habitat and mitigate for the repairs that we're seeing. And if you look at that ordinance, that's the major section of it, habitat and mitigation. But you are correct, the city's jurisdiction doesn't really extend to the middle of the river. That's more of a state.
Thank you.
And Trevor, actually, real quick for you, I know you said you have, excuse me, Jacobs, the engineer of record, indicated that the gravel bar changes were minor compared to what was previously there. Is there any plan, in low water next year to monitor changes to those gravel bars or to check?
I couldn't speak to that, those efforts from an engineering standpoint
Okay.
in River. The Public Works, we're working in conjunction with Public Works and the contracted engineer to, proceed with phase 2, which would be the restoration and mitigation efforts, which I'm assuming would take into consideration in river dynamics as well.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I have 2 questions.
Okay, please.
So I guess the first could be answered by either Mr. Moser or Parks and Rec. I don't recall seeing a date of when the actual work was done in the river for phase 1 in our packet.
The in-river work was completed approximately like 2, maybe even 3 weeks ago, because water releases started about that time. The contractor is still on site making some changes to the pathway
Oh,
within the river system corridor, the 70-foot setback, because what they had originally built was unacceptable to the city per the standards and the contract that we put out, so they had to redo it.
so they're on the greenbelt because I think that,
I believe they're going to be finished, hopefully, if they're not already, they should be finished by this Thursday. So yeah, that section should be reopened, so.
okay. And then the next question is, I saw there was a 404 permit application in our packet, but it wasn't signed. And that application clearly stated that work would be between February 1st and April 15th.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's correct. The 404 application is just the application.
Mhm.
The Parks and Public Works, they proceeded forward and would get the actual permit from the Corps of Engineers and from before proceeding. I didn't have that actual permit in hand with the application material that was submitted to me. And you're correct that I think that work needed to be done between that time frame. Ideally earlier in February, earlier in March, not in April. So that's why they needed to get in there as soon as possible, because once you start getting into late March, snow starts melting and the river flows start going up. And that's
So-
why they got in there as quick as they could.
Okay, so just to confirm, the application was submitted to the Corps prior to construction.
Chairman, Commissioner Seja, the 404 permit was not actually approved by Army Corps and Water Resources until after the emergency approval of the river system permit.
Okay.
So the contractor had to wait until the 404 permit was approved by both of those agencies before they could enter the river.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we had, I think we're good on questions, everybody? Okay. We'll go ahead and open up testimony. We had Adam Bass signed up. Mr. Bass, welcome. You have 3 minutes. You can start with your name and address, please, for the record.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Mr. Chair and committee members. Adam Bass, owner of Boise River Outdoor Opportunities. It's a business operating out of 7661 West Riverside Drive, Garden City, Idaho, 83714. We run trips from Eckert Bridge all the way to Caldwell. I'm a licensed outfitter. I do educational programs on the river, teach people about it all the time, and provide safe ways to recreate on the river. To answer committee member Gillespie's question of who has jurisdiction, the Boise River is federally owned. The state holds the water in public trust through the Idaho Department of Water Resources. The state owns the state holds the land in public trust, and that's IDL. Okay, so that answers that one. So this, I only have 3 minutes. So this is a very sensitive topic. This is a major spot that we operate on. This island, we would get out with our guests. We would give them an opportunity to swim, give them a chance to hang out, have lunch, and just relax on the river. It was a really good place to have community and to talk about whatever came to mind, have a good time on the river. We would get out there. And now this has been completely removed. I am also a professional engineer, so I do understand these maps pretty well and the contouring of them. I have been involved with projects that use cofferdams and 404 permits. There's more than one type of cofferdam. So if one cofferdam doesn't work, then the next solution isn't just to remove an entire island that's outside of the plans and outside of the scope of work for the contractor, or to even approve or allow that. There's other ways to go about it, and I'm concerned about phase 2 or other projects using construction means and methods as a way to destroy our ecosystem or remove parts of it. I'm also concerned of the impacts of the quality of the tour that I provide on the river. This will significantly change the operations that we have on the river. As a request to you guys, I would like to be requested to be listed as a stakeholder on the next phase of the project and be included as part of that partnership. I've made similar requests in other areas of the river and never been reached out to by the city of the potential impacts of their decisions and the projects, not only to our operations, but understanding what their decisions are, help us understand how to make things more safe for guests too. And then my last request is to review and create a more thorough understanding of why the island needed to be removed to facilitate construction, and to create a report and make it available to the public.
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll bring the applicant back for rebuttal or quick rebuttal. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize. Would you like to testify? Yeah, please come on up. My apologies. Getting ahead of myself.
Thank you. It is always a treat to be part of the public process. I appreciate your service. My name is Rob Tiedemann. I live at 217 North Walnut Street in Boise, Idaho. You might see my face as being familiar. I was very involved in the Boise zoning code rewrite and advocating for the river at that time. I don't mean to boast or brag, but I need to establish my bona fides with you. I am a restoration ecologist. I hold a PhD in that. I serve as a visiting scholar at the University of Idaho. I'm a private consultant, and most proudly, I am the president of the board of directors of the Boise River Enhancement Network. I would like you to consider the fact that there are several facts that have been placed in the record that require clarification. On January 21st, we indeed did visit with the city engineer and the consulting engineer on site and talked about the importance of this project, but also the fact that sensitivities had to be played so that the resource was protected. I'd like to read, if I may, from a portion of my record of that field review. Although generally wary of the common and customary use of rock riprap as planned for in Phase 1, the Boise River Enhancement Network understands and accepts the proposal and permitted project as a temporary fix to be followed at a later time by a more comprehensive plan. We're pleased to be partnered with you to demonstrate bank repair and restoration projects at Kristen Armstrong Municipal Park in a manner that's practical and to explore alternatives to the use of rock riprap. Bren would appreciate an invitation from the city of Boise and their consultant to participate in Phase 2 of the project during the time of early coordination. We have not received an invitation to do so. And removal of gravels from the bed and banks of the Boise River is also a part of Phase 1 of the project. Bren regards, based on best available science, these features of the river as nursery sites and planting beds for black cottonwood and other native riparian plants. We believe it is in the best interest of the city of Boise to preserve and protect these sites to promote moderation of ambient water temperatures that support the cold water fishery and provide habitat for fish and wildlife. I think it's important to point out the regulatory errors that have been made in this project. Number one, I do not see anything in the record that indicates that an after-the-fact permit has been granted by the Corps of Engineers or Idaho Department of Water Resources. I don't see anything in the record to indicate that a waiver has been granted. And I don't see anything in the record to indicate that the applicant has asked for those agencies to approve the
Time.
removal of the gravel bar. I believe based upon that, this item should be tabled for further discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. I don't think there's anybody else in person to testify. I'm going to check in with the folks online. We do have 2 folks online. If you would like to testify, please raise your hand. Okay. Looks like no hands are going up online. So we now will go ahead to rebuttal. Mr. Kestner.
Chairman, Commissioners, I'm not sure that if I have a rebuttal for the testimony you just received. Again, I received communication from the contracted engineer that there was a decision made to use the material because, I read this. It says some, but not all of the material from the top of the gravel bar was used for the diversion and then was distributed along the channel during demolition of the berm, which is assuming that that was all done without an engineering approval at the time. So again, we worked with Public Works for the construction management of this project. The Public Works representatives are not available here to speak to you this evening. The engineer of record is not able to be here to speak to you this evening. So all I can say from a parks planner standpoint is we are, as the property owner, the applicant has followed the requirements of the Boise River System application. We had planning director approval in an emergency situation to perform the first phase of this project before the waters came up, and that has been completed. So I'll leave it with that. Any additional questions for me?
No more questions now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay. We'll go ahead and bring this back before the commission to render a decision. Again, we are discussing CFH 23-102.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie.
move we approve CFH 23-102 with all the terms and conditions of the staff report.
Thank you, Milt. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Doan. Milt,
Mr. Chairman.
please.
So with respect to the gravel bar and the things that were done in the river, and whether or not there was a regulatory error involving the federal government or the state government, this commission isn't really part of that process. If the federal government has an issue with what was done, the federal government can take actions appropriate to that issue. If the state government has issues with what was done, the state government can take issue. The city doesn't have jurisdiction on what happens in the middle of the river. And I don't see that this permit application has much to do with that. This permit application is to repair about 100 lineal feet of the riverbank and a half acre of Class A land in an A1 open zone. That's it. We're not going back and fixing what was done in the river. At this point, we didn't hear any testimony about like, oh, this permit is flawed in the way it deals with the erosion repair at the bank. It was mostly about the river system. We did hear some questions about using rock and rickrack or whatever they call it for repairs. And I'm sure there's a big debate in the river community about how to deal with these sorts of things, and I understand that, but I just don't think this permit at this time is the right place to have that discussion. These folks just want to get in and do some re-landscaping and make sure the greenbelt doesn't wash away again, and that's kind of it. So that's where I'm at.
Very good. Okay, thanks, Mel. Any other comments?
Mr.
Any-
Chairman, I
Mr.
will be
Seah?
supporting the motion and I agree with with Commissioner Gillespie that, we don't the commission does not get caught up in the details, but in my full-time position, I work and dabble in the world of environmental policy. And so Commissioner Gillespie is correct that, the city doesn't have jurisdiction, but our actions in that body of water do require that we seek permitting by the federal agency that has jurisdiction. And in that permit, and we have to come up with some best management practices or mitigation measures. And it is up to the entity who's requesting that permit, be it the city, be it whoever, to comply. So just wanted to share that tidbit.
Yeah, thank you for that. Very good. Your comments?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Daly?
I'll be supportive of the motion. I guess the only thing that concerns me is it sounds like, I don't know if accusations is the right word, but maybe it's something, it sounds like that some decisions maybe were made without full transparency, it sounds like, and maybe questionable at best, more so worse. And I just hope that the process overall is improved in phase 2, and communication protocols are improved in phase 2, and that these types of things, while I understand sometimes can happen, and maybe there's some leeway that's given the engineers on site, in certain instances, but some of these things that were discussed today sound pretty serious. And I would hope that we take this as a learning experience. So that's all I'll add.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Commissioner Danley. Yeah, that's where my comments were headed as well. I'll be supporting the motion. I think these are always difficult in that, we're dealing with natural systems, and, we have a window now to make the repair. So I understand some of the sense of urgency to make the repairs to prevent further damage. But I do agree that I think that we've learned, or hope we've learned with this, that there is quite a bit of care within the community and people paying attention, and that we need to be mindful of all of the users in the river, and that we need to make sure that all the voices are heard and that proper care is given to this resource, right? And that goes from the river to the greenbelt. I understand there's multiple facilities being discussed here, right? I mean, part of the reasons that we're doing this riverbank improvement is to protect the greenbelt as well. But the river is certainly important, and obviously the public is paying attention, and we need to be mindful of that moving forward with future phases. And anytime that there's work happening by the city in the river corridor itself.
Mr. Chairman?
No.
Right, and I think the appropriate view for dealing with these river dynamics issue is at the Army Corps of Engineers, who has jurisdiction on what happens in that damn river. So in a sense, I appreciate that these folks are here, but they're at the wrong venue.
I would disagree with that, considering the fact that the city of Boise commissioned this effort, right, and this work. So they do have to get Corps approval to make the work happen, but we're the ones driving the boat right now, right? But we can discuss that later at another time after a basketball game. I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. Again, we have a motion to approve CFH 23-102. Christina, please.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Danley,
Yes.
Gillespie,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Seha,
Yes.
Torres,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Very good. That concludes our business this evening. We are adjourned.